In an earlier module, we talked about how the Great Depression was beginning to set in as we moved from 1929 into the early 1930s. And the president at the time, Herbert Hoover, wasn't wanting to get involved in the economy. He felt that government had no place in the economy, should not intervene. Instead, it should be volunteer organizations, businesses, workers coming together to try to figure out how to solve the problems of the economy, right? To get people working again. But eventually, when that didn't work and the depression didn't go away, Hoover realized that he had to support legislation that would involve the government intervening into the economy. And so we saw the passage of several acts that put money towards providing jobs for workers, right? Distributing billions of dollars to the states for construction projects, loans for banks so that they don't go under. So you start to see President Hoover moving in that direction, but because of his failures during the early part of the Great Depression, he doesn't win a second term. He doesn't win the election of 1932. And so we're going to see the election of a brand new president, and that's going to be Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. Okay. And when FDR steps in, he realizes, the government needs to play a much more heavier role in the economy in order to get out of the Great Depression. Okay. And so he takes some pretty drastic measures. For one, he calls for a bank holiday. Okay. A bank holiday. What does that mean? It means that for a period of time, no one can use the banks. Okay. No banking transactions are going to be happening during the bank holiday, which means you cannot pull your money out of the bank. Okay, that's why he called the bank holiday, because we had spoke about this a little bit before. There were several periods of panic, where people would go and try to pull their money out of the banks, right? And it would cause banks to fail, and thousands of banks, right? At least 5,000 banks went under in the 1930s. Okay, before 1935. So wow. That's why Roosevelt is stepping in. It's like, first of all, we got to get our financial system correct. So he's going to call the bank holiday to make sure that banks are going to be able to continue to function, right? And not going to fall apart if people do try to pull their money out of the bank. Also related to the banking system, we're going to see the passage of the Emergency Banking Act, 1933. And the Emergency Banking Act is going to provide financial support for the banks that are struggling and trying to stay afloat, right? So it's just another measure, more legislation trying to support the banks to try to keep them stable. You also see the passage of the Glass-Steagall Act. And the Glass-Steagall Act made it to where banks could no longer buy stocks on the stock market. Okay, can't buy, can't sell, can't be involved with the stock market. Okay, that way the stock market is not going to have such a heavy impact on the banks, and banks who are using inappropriate methods when buying stocks are going to be barred from doing so in the future. Okay, so Glass-Steagall Act, very important. The act also created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, right? Maybe some of you have heard of that before. The FDIC is extremely important because that acts as insurance, right, for people's bank accounts. So if the bank does go under, right, goes out of business, well, then the government is going to reimburse you your money, right? So no more panics. So Glass-Steagall Act is extremely important in that sense, right? Because people aren't going to panic and pull their money out because they think the bank's going to go out of business, because they know, the government's got my back. The government's going to insure my money, all right? So yes, very important. Another important act related to the financial system and FDR is going to take us off the gold standard. Okay, and so what does that mean? It means that basically the amount of paper money that you can print, it used to be based on how much gold you have in your reserves, right? So you couldn't print up paper money if you didn't have the gold to back it up. But when FDR takes the US off the gold standard, we could just print as much paper money as we want to. Okay, we could put paper money in the circulation and we don't have to have gold to back it up. Why does he want to do that? Some would say, oh, that's horrible, don't do that, you're going to make us go into debt. Well, we're in the Great Depression at the time, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to just leave it alone like President Hoover did and hope that people volunteer and step up and it's going to solve itself? It didn't happen. right? That didn't happen. So yeah, so getting off of the gold standard was an attempt to print more money, put more money in circulation so that hopefully, we're going to create more jobs. People are going to be able to get their hands on that money and use it to spend, right? To buy various products, and that's going to create more jobs, and the economy eventually will come back to life. In 1933, you're going to see several important brand new agencies, federal agencies and programs being created trying to solve the problems of the Great Depression. First one we'll talk about is the National Recovery Administration, the NRA. Okay, and so not the National Rifle Association, right? Something different. All right, this was an agency that was made up of private businessmen. Okay, so just normal businessmen, of course, from big companies though, that were brought together to sit on this administration, and then they come together and they're trying to work together to fix prices, right? They want prices to be set, and so it's kind of interesting. It's kind of like the pools, that whole idea of pools that we talked about before, where people from rival companies are coming together to set prices. You also have the NRA trying to set the amount of goods that each industry can produce, right? So we're talking about like heavy government control of the economy, but it's not elected officials who are doing it. It's private businessmen who are sitting on this National Recovery Administration. All right. So here's the thing: workers were supposed to be given the right to unionize, right? That was supposed to be one aspect of the NRA, right? And so that's a good thing for workers because they could fight for their rights, but didn't happen in practice, right? A lot of business owners were just like, oh yeah, they're supposed to organize, whatever. Who's going to enforce it? Who's going to stop us? Who's going to regulate us? The regulations weren't put in place to force businesses to allow workers to unionize at the time. So aspects of the NRA were a bit of a failure for the general public. For the big businesses, it was pretty good, right? They were working to try to bring their businesses back up, right? So it was more working towards their advantage, right? Businesses were actually trying to take advantage of the NRA to create these pools, right, where you have large businesses that are agreeing to focus on specific regions, and they're going to dominate those regions, right? And now it's legal because the government's saying it's okay to do this, right? And so in a sense, they're kind of pushing small businesses out of competition, right? Small businesses aren't able to compete because you have these businessmen who are working together in the NRA to make it to where they dominate their own specific region. Okay, and so in that sense, the NRA was a bit of a failure. And so the NRA was one administration that was created due to the passage of the National Industrial Recovery Act. Okay, again, 1933. And so another aspect of this National Industrial Recovery Act, this bill that was passed by Congress, was the creation of the Public Works Administration, the PWA. And this was an administration that provided jobs by sending billions of dollars to private construction companies, right? So it's like if you have your own private construction company, right? Like I got my own construction business, the government's going to send me money. They're going to be giving me money, and then I'm going to go out and hire a bunch of workers, and we're going to be working on these construction projects for, it could be a number of different things. It could be like the building of public buildings. It could be creating roads or highways or bridges. And so these are the types of jobs that were created, construction work, right? And so that's the Public Works Administration, okay? Another administration that's created was the Civil Works Administration, the CWA, okay? This one is pretty much similar to the PWA, but in the PWA, like I said, it was private companies, construction companies that were getting money from the government, and then they go out and work on government projects and hire workers. But with the CWA, the Civil Works Administration, the government is the employer. The government is hiring people, not private construction companies, but the government is directly hiring people. Now you work for the government temporarily, right? And then you go up forward, and you also are going to be working on other public projects, similar like infrastructure, buildings, public buildings, etc. Okay. And yet another organization that was created, one of these New Deal agencies, was the Civil Conservation Corps, the CCC. And again, the whole point of this is to provide jobs for Americans. That's the point, right? And the CCC, they're providing jobs that are related to environmental conservation, right? That's why it's called the Conservation Corps. right? Environmental. So you have people who are going out and working in the national parks, the wildlife reserves, right? They're living in these little camps, and they may be going to clean up the parks, or maybe they're designing or building public buildings on the parks. And so you have people being put to work in a number of different areas in society, mostly in construction, right? But these are government jobs in some cases. Other cases, it's private companies that are being paid by the government, right, to hire people. So the whole point of all these administrations is to get people back to work so that they have money and they can spend that money, and then businesses be like, oh, there's more demand, people are spending, all right, let's increase production. The economy is going to come back to life, right? And then they can hire more people, and it will continue to grow from there, reduce unemployment.